The age-old question of what shapes human behavior, personality, and development, nature or nurture, has remained one of the most profound and hotly debated topics in the history of psychology, philosophy, and the broader human sciences. At its core, the nature versus nurture debate seeks to address whether our characteristics, abilities, and dispositions are predominantly determined by genetic inheritance or shaped by environmental factors such as upbringing, culture, education, and life experience. Far from being a purely academic exercise, this question touches the very heart of how we understand identity, responsibility, potential, and human freedom. It bears consequences for how we educate children, treat psychological disorders, design public policy, and even view moral accountability. Historically, the dichotomy between nature and nurture can be traced back to antiquity. The ancient Greek philosophers Plato and Aristotle already wrestled with similar questions. Plato leaned toward nativism, suggesting that knowledge and behavior were innate, while Aristotle emphasized the formative role of experience and learning. In the modern era, the Enlightenment ushered in empiricist thinkers like John Locke, who famously described the human mind as a tabula rasa, a blank slate on which experience writes. This empiricist stance formed the philosophical backbone for much of behaviorist psychology in the 20th century, championed by figures such as John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner. They maintained that behavior is almost entirely the result of conditioning and environment, largely dismissing biological predispositions. However, the pendulum began to swing back in the latter half of the 20th century with the rise of genetics, evolutionary psychology, and neuroscience. Twin and adoption studies played a pivotal role in reshaping our understanding. For example, studies comparing monozygotic twins raised apart versus together revealed striking similarities in traits such as intelligence, temperament, and even political attitudes, suggesting a substantial genetic component. Bouchard et al., 1990. Moreover, developments in molecular genetics, particularly the mapping of the human genome, allowed researchers to begin identifying specific genes associated with psychological traits and disorders, from schizophrenia to extroversion. Plomin et al., 2016. Yet, it would be a gross oversimplification to imagine nature and nurture as opposing forces in a zero-sum game. Contemporary psychology has largely moved beyond the binary framing of the debate and instead embraces an interactionist perspective. Traits emerge from a dynamic interplay between genes and environment, often in complex and nonlinear ways. Gene-environment interactions, GXE, and gene-environment correlations, RGE, are now foundational concepts in developmental psychology. For instance, a child with a genetic predisposition to high musical aptitude may be more likely to seek out or be offered musical training, which in turn enhances the innate potential. This is an example of active gene-environment correlation. Even more intriguing is the field of epigenetics, which reveals that environmental factors can influence gene expression without altering the underlying DNA sequence. For example, chronic stress, maternal care, nutrition, or exposure to toxins can lead to epigenetic modifications that affect how genes are turned on or off. Meany, 2010. In other words, nurture can shape nature at a molecular level, often in ways that reverberate across generations. Animal studies have shown that rats raised by nurturing mothers develop more effective stress response systems compared to those raised by neglectful ones, due to epigenetic changes in the glucocorticoid receptor gene. Weaver et al., 2004. These findings underscore the profound impact of early relational environments, echoing long-standing insights from attachment theory and developmental psychology. Consider the case of intelligence, one of the most widely studied and socially consequential traits. IQ has a heritability estimate of approximately 50 to 80%, depending on age and population studied. Deary et al., 2006. However, this does not mean that intelligence is fixed or immutable. Educational interventions, socioeconomic status, parental involvement, and even exposure to language-rich environments can significantly affect cognitive development, especially in early childhood. The famous Flynn effect, a generational rise in IQ scores observed across many countries, highlights how environmental factors, such as improved nutrition, education, and healthcare, can elevate cognitive performance on a population level. Flynn, 2007. In mental health, too, the interaction of genes and environment is unmistakable. Major depressive disorder, for instance, is influenced by both genetic vulnerability and life stressors. Caspi et al., 2003, demonstrated that individuals with a specific variant of the serotonin transporter gene were more likely to develop depression in response to stressful life events, whereas those without the variant showed more resilience. This kind of research complicates simplistic notions of cause and effect, revealing a landscape where biology and biography are inseparably entangled. These insights are not limited to scientific abstraction. They manifest vividly in everyday life. Imagine two children born with similar genetic predispositions for anxiety. One grows up in a stable, supportive home, attends a school that emphasizes emotional regulation, and develops coping strategies early. The other experiences neglect, instability, and trauma. While both may carry the same biological vulnerability, their outcomes can diverge dramatically. The same principle applies in education, where students with similar innate capabilities may perform differently due to teacher expectations, classroom environment, peer influence, and parental support. Recognizing the mutual shaping of nature and nurture can guide more equitable and effective interventions in both educational and clinical settings. This evolving understanding invites several deeper reflections. To what extent are we truly the authors of our character, and how should society assign praise or blame? Can justice systems and educational policies adapt to the nuanced reality that people differ not only in capacity, but also in their developmental trajectories and environmental histories? Should interventions target the individual or the environment, or both? Moreover, the insights from gene-environment interactions call us to consider ethical challenges, particularly in the emerging era of behavioral genetics. How do we prevent genetic determinism from taking root in public consciousness or policy? How can we ensure that genetic information is not misused to stereotype, discriminate, or pathologize? It is also crucial to acknowledge cultural and contextual dimensions in this discussion. The weight given to nature versus nurture varies across societies. In individualistic cultures, there is often a greater emphasis on innate talent and personal responsibility, whereas collectivist cultures may foreground the shaping power of community, social roles, and relational duty. These cultural lenses influence how people interpret success, failure, parenting, education, and even mental health. Thus, a comprehensive view of human development must incorporate not only biology and psychology, but also sociology, anthropology, and philosophy. In summation, the nature versus nurture debate, while no longer cast in stark opposition, continues to offer a profound lens through which we can explore the complexities of human development. Rather than choosing sides, modern psychology invites us into the intricate dance between genes and environment, biology and biography, predisposition and possibility. This integrated perspective affirms both the limitations and the plasticity of the human condition. It cautions against simplistic determinisms, whether biological or environmental, and encourages a humble, hopeful stance that while we are shaped by forces beyond our control, we are also agents capable of shaping our own lives and those of others through meaningful relationships, thoughtful interventions, and transformative environments.